If you look at Japan from the outside, these are the things you might see. Advanced technology and robotics, zero crime rate, an incredible culture, the third largest economy in the world, a healthy population, and companies that are famous worldwide. In many ways, Japan can be seen as an ideal country. But if you look beneath the surface, you'll find that while all these points are true, there's also a very dark side to life in Japan. In Japan, millions of people live lives that are so strange and bizarre, you might not believe it. They've been unable to succeed in society, don't have jobs, haven't married, lack the essentials for a normal and happy life, and have become completely isolated. These people are known as the lost generation. They make up about 15% of the country's population, and their tragic stories symbolize Japan's downfall and are a sign of the country's concerning future. This is the dark side of Japan, the lost generation. Although this topic has been forgotten, back in the 1980s, it was predicted that Japan would become the next economic superpower, replacing the United States and taking full control of the global economy, similar to what China is today. This seemed so likely that it caused serious concern about Japan in the United States. One article talked about Paul Harvey, and another predicted that Japan was going to buy the entire United States. It was like the storylines of the movies Die Hard, Rising Sun, and Blade Runner, where the dominance of Japanese companies over America and the world was depicted. This fear was the result of Japan's miraculous performance. 3 decades of continuous economic growth made possible by Japan's unique economic system, which at that time was considered superior to the Western model. This impressive performance was all thanks to the cooperation between Japan's large corporations and the government. These groups of companies, called keiretsu, were collections of Japan's biggest companies, each holding shares in the other. They had working relationships and shared stakes while remaining independent, and they cooperated with each other to support one another. The largest keiretsu benefited from unfair government support in the form of huge loans provided by the Bank of Japan, meaning these companies had access to an endless stream of cash to enable massive overseas expansion. Meanwhile, the government prevented foreign companies from expanding and advancing in the Japanese market. This system was not healthy or fair, but it was working well. The Japanese stock market was booming, and Japanese products were taking over markets one by one. Ordinary people knew that if they worked hard and got a university degree, they could find a good job at a large Japanese company, guaranteeing them lifetime employment. Japan was progressing at an unstoppable pace, and everything was great, until everything changed. By 1991, Japan had experienced 3 decades of rapid growth and had become the second largest economy in the world after the United States. As the economy grew, so did real estate prices and the value of companies listed on the stock market. But by the late 1980s, this growth had gone too far and turned into a frenzy of speculation and profit-seeking. Everyone believed that this economic boom and asset growth would continue forever, and that the more they invested, the more they would earn. Meanwhile, the Bank of Japan started printing and lending money to anyone who came along, regardless of what the money was for or how trustworthy the person requesting it was. The bank kept doing this until one day, the economic bubble burst. In the 1990s, the stock market fell by 43%, and real estate prices followed suit. The bursting of the bubble meant that now even ordinary people had less money to spend, and no one was willing to invest in Japanese companies anymore, leading to the end of this economic boom. Moreover, in the years following the bursting of the bubbles, the impact of this event on Japan's system quickly became apparent. It was revealed that corruption in Japanese business and government was very common and widespread, from insider trading to stock manipulation, fraud, and bribery. Additionally, the unlimited supply of loans had created hundreds of zombie companies. In political economics, a zombie company is a company that requires financial aid to operate, or a debt-ridden company that can pay the interest on its debt but cannot repay the principal amount. In such a situation, businesses that should have gone bankrupt years ago continued to survive thanks to the endless supply of cheap loans from the government. Within just a decade, Japan transformed from an economic tiger riding on a Japanese miracle to the sick man of Asia. It was a severe economic collapse, but not entirely unique. Economies around the world rise and fall. It's part of life. But in Japan, the story was different. Unlike other countries, the economic recession in Japan had devastating effects on an entire generation, effects that never fully disappeared from the lives of millions. Why did this happen? Well, to answer that question, we first need to understand Japan's work and employment culture, which, simply put, is very strict and has several unique aspects that make it completely different from any other job market in the world. Working in a Japanese company starts with something called shushoku katsudo, a unique Japanese job hunting ritual that university graduates must go through at the end of their studies. Many companies, including the largest Keiretsu, only hire recent graduates, and they do so only once a year, but on a large scale. In this mass hiring, recent graduates have to go through this job hunting ritual, which is full of group interviews and seminars, alongside thousands of others, all wearing the same black and white suits. In the end, they get a job that they can keep for decades until retirement. This employment policy also includes a common practice called shushin koyo, or lifetime employment. Promotions occur only within the company and follow another work policy known as shanai shushin. The company trains its employees in this profession until they become future executives. These work practices, which were considered global standards in the 1990s, are still very common in Japan today. While they provide stability, they also make the job market incredibly rigid. This means that if you want to find a good job, you only have one chance after graduating from university, and once you're hired, you remain employed in one company for the rest of your career. But if you fail to get hired, you're left out, and most companies will close their doors to you. But here's the point. When the bubble burst and the economic boom ended, this hiring ritual broke down. During the economic boom, finding at least one corporate job wasn't that difficult. After 1990, most companies completely stopped hiring for almost the entire decade. They no longer hired graduates at all so that they could retain all their lifetime employees during the economic crisis. Eventually, companies resumed hiring in the new century, but the hiring conditions were no longer the same, and finding a job became even more difficult. For those who graduated in the 1990s, it was already too late. By then, they were no longer recent graduates, so companies wouldn't hire them, instead opting to hire fresh graduates. The only fault of these individuals was that they were born at the wrong time, and for that reason alone, they lost their chance and were overlooked by the system. This entire generation of millions was forgotten, ignored, and forced to spend the rest of their lives in temporary, part-time, low-paying jobs. This period became known as the Employment Ice Age, and those who graduated during that time are known as the Lost Generation. Since Japan's economy never fully recovered, other young people who graduated in the 2000s and even after 2010 joined the ranks of the Lost Generation. Over the past 30 years, this period has collectively been known as the Lost Decades. It's clear that such an event is tragic for those who are part of the Lost Generation. But they weren't the only ones affected. Their tragic fate negatively impacted the entire Japanese society and cast a dark shadow over Japan's future. An entire generation of people in their 30s and 40s has been completely absent from the job market and ignored. These individuals often live with their parents and have never had enough financial security to start a family. They've never had proper jobs or careers. About 15% of the population, approximately 17 million people, are considered part of the lost generation, and they fall into an age group that is crucial for the economy of any country. These people, in their 30s and 40s, are typically the ones who spend the most on family, housing, mortgages, and cars. They're the ones who keep the economic engine running. But now in Japan, there is no one to do these things. And, of course, the economy isn't the only problem in Japan. The presence of the lost generation makes things worse. Currently, the country is facing a severe aging population. Japan has the highest percentage of elderly people, and it is aging faster than any other country in the world. partly due to millions of young people from the lost generation who never had children. In any country, the elderly rely on taxes paid by the working population. But in Japan, this support is dwindling. Additionally, the lost generation has given rise to another social issue known as Hikikomori, a phenomenon that increasingly threatens the survival of Japanese society. These Japanese men have voluntarily decided to withdraw from society and live in complete isolation. They never leave their homes, have no social interactions, and are usually entirely financially dependent on their parents. The first Hikikomori were members of the lost generation, men in their 30s and 40s who couldn't meet the societal expectations placed on them, such as finding a job, climbing the career ladder, starting a family, and supporting them. Instead, they chose to completely give up. Eventually, others from younger generations joined them. Even though they had opportunities to enter the job market, they found it too stressful and competitive. Today, there are nearly 1 million of these men in Japanese society, and their numbers are growing. This social phenomenon is rapidly becoming a real problem affecting the entire society. The Japanese government is aware of the highly negative impact that the lost generation and the increasing number of hikikomori are having on Japanese society and the economy. They have announced efforts to help this generation get back on their feet and reintegrate those who have isolated themselves back into society. However, so far, there has been very little success. The problem is that Japan's economy is still not in good shape, and the work culture remains very rigid. Not only are people expected to work extremely long hours and follow a strict hierarchy, but many companies still adhere to the lifetime employment model. They hire only once a year, and promotions are only possible for those within the company. This makes getting a second chance nearly impossible. If you can't get into a company, you won't have another opportunity, so millions of people are stuck in this situation, and their numbers are increasing every day. Each year, more young people fail to succeed in this ruthless system and ultimately just give up. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. We are Exodopia. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.